To those people who found out their parent had a second secret family, how did you discover the truth? What happened afterwards? I did ancestry DNA and found a very close familial match to some guy I didn't know. After contacting him, I found out he's a twin, and they were both adopted, but I still couldn't figure out how we were related. Eventually I found the right records, marriage certs, and it turns out they are my mom's older half brothers, only 9 months older from her real bio dad. I don't think she even knew she had a different dad because it looks like Champ there did it again and bailed on my grandma before my mom was born, just like he did with the twins, and pulled the same stunt a few more times. Confirms that my mom's side is even more fricked up than we already knew, and now I have 2 new uncles and a slew of cousins I didn't have for 35 years. My dad was divorcing my mom to marry someone else. Divorce papers came to our house and we found out he was married to someone else while I was a kid, divorcing them a couple years after I was born. It was surprising. Not quite the same, but at 25 years old, I found out last year that before getting with my mom, my dad was married to an elderly woman. He said he only married her because she was a multi-millionaire. He left her to be with my mom full time after she got pregnant, and they left the state. The old woman passed away, my parents got married, and we never got to see any of those sweet millions. Also, nobody really knows if the old woman passed before or after my parents got married, so yeah, my parents' marriage might not actually be legitimate according to the law. This is sorta related to the question. I'm adopted, and at age 19 I decided to look for my biological mother. I found her and reached out. Turns out I have 3 half brothers. We all have different dads. One brother is older than me, the other 2 are younger. She never told anyone in the family about me and just dropped off the face of the earth for 9 months until she had me and gave me up. I'm not sure why I was the only one not kept in the family. Everyone, including myself, was pretty shocked. I won the lottery out of all of my siblings because I have the best parents and most opportunity. I'm glad I was given up, but the question of why never goes away. I asked about my bio dad and I am 99% sure she doesn't even know who he is, so I stopped asking and I don't talk to her anymore. I do talk to my brothers pretty regularly along with my grandparents and aunts. So yay, I was the secret. My neighbor across the street. Actually, we moved together from Staten Island to NJ and bought houses across the street from each other because our dads were best friends. I used to play with the daughter every day and we practically grew up together and acted like cousins. Fast forward 7 years and my family moved to FL. Then we found out that the dad had a daughter with another woman. The little girl I grew up with ended up becoming a big sister best friend to the daughter her father secretly raised. Parents go divorced obviously when everything came out, but I see her on Instagram and she's always posting photos of her and her half sister she discovered when she was 12. She writes the nicest captions to "my soulmate is my sister," things like that. I think she was happy to get a sister. The other girl is just a dark-skinned replica of her too. It's adorable and it turned out okay in the end, except for my friend's mom, who never got over it. I don't blame her. Happened to my aunt. Somebody did the movie thing of put a basket on the front door and ring the bell. Well, inside the basket was a newborn and some heartfelt letter about how the mother could not raise the kid. They were a well-known Christian family in the town. At the time her husband had a seat in the town's parliament. So, they raised the boy with their older kids, never telling him he's adopted. Until one day, about 17 years later, in a family lunch, one of the matriarchs, a great aunt of mine that was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, casually says, "Oh, he's so handsome and resembles you. Would you mind if I take a picture to show his mother?" Well, turns out the boy was actually my aunt's husband's son with another woman and he knew it all along. He's actually the one who instructed his bio mother on the basket thing. My mom was a university student when she met my biological father. He was older, classy as frick, dressed in suits, had a Mercedes, swept her off her feet. They started dating and he took her out to amazing places, went all out, met the parents. This guy spent literally all day with her, kept staying in my mom's house from early morning until late at night, spent all his money on my mom and whatever she wanted. Even when he was home he was stuck to the landline, early 90s, phone. My mom went to his house and met his parents. They made dinner and congratulated the beautiful couple, even mentioning that they could hear wedding bells. She also met his siblings and other family members, who were supportive. My mom decided she had to finish her master's degree before settling down, which looking back was a good idea. My mom got pregnant with me, and while I wasn't planned, she was over the moon and told my biological dad. He acted kind of weird, but she attributed it to the news. Then he started to not take her calls, to slip out early, ignore her needs. When she asked him to start getting ready for the baby diapers, crib, pregnancy birth stuff, he wouldn't pay attention to her. It got to the point she basically told him to either step up or go to heck, and he said he couldn't take care of the baby because he had like 5 others. Turns out he was a married man with kids, who actually fully lived with his family. He just liked to frequent young women and his family supported this, to the point they would normally meet the women he swindled and act like he didn't have a wife at home and a troop of kids waiting for their dad. My mom was shocked. She officially broke up with him, sent him to heck, called his wife to tell her. The wife knew, but regarded my mom as a S who seduced her good husband, and has stayed with him until this day. I don't know my half brothers and sisters because they are still brainwashed and think their dad is amazing and he could do no wrong. Stupidly enough, my mom always spoke of him positively even though he's never even given me a call or a birthday card. I've been trying to add my biological dad on Facebook, sent him messages asking to talk so I can get closure, but he deletes my friend requests and leaves me on read. His wife, his kids, my mom, me. We didn't deserve this. He might have seen this whole ordeal as just a couple months of fun, but my life was created this way. That is my beginning. Sometimes I want him to die, other times I wanna hug him. Mostly die, though. I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but I'll tell you anyway. When I was 18, my father and I were on the road together, and after a long period of silence he blurts out, "Your mother had a son 10 years before you were born. Several years before we knew each other. She gave him up for adoption. He recently contacted her through a third party for relevant medical information, and then he went back to silence." I was immediately, what the frick? WHAATTHEE. It was devastating to hear. I've asked my mom to try and make contact to let him know that he has younger siblings that want to meet him. She has not expressed any desire to do so. I've often wondered about reaching out to him, but I don't know how to start the process. My mother has stated that she went through the Catholic Church for the adoption, and every knowledgeable person I've spoken with regarding the subject has told me that if he doesn't want to be found, you ain't gonna find him. You should be able to contact an adoption agency resource for information on how to legally put it out there that you want to contact him. What resources are available depend on how many years have passed, and such. There are at least online forums for people looking for siblings and such. Not my parent, but an uncle. As a child, my dad's brother was our cool uncle. He was at our house often, always treated us well, and would hang out with my siblings and I. He had a wife and 3 kids, younger than me and my siblings. When I was about 18, my then 19-year-old got a message on MySpace from a guy with the same exact name as him, which also happens to the same exact name as our uncle. My brother was named after our grandfather, and so was our uncle. Our last name is unique in America, so it was odd. The man on Facebook went on to inform our brother that he was looking for our uncle, who had abandoned him and his 2 siblings when they were young. We were shocked. He never spoke of having any other children other than the 3 that lived with him. He had no pictures of other children in his home, or any type of indication that he had other children. I eventually brought it up to my mom, and she told us the truth, and it all made sense because my mom never liked his wife and didn't like when he came to our house. She would often even keep us from visiting him. She said that he had a wife and 3 kids before I was even born, and then he went abroad for several months, leaving his wife and kids with my parents, and just never came back and didn't contact his wife. His wife eventually moved away with the kids, and then a year or 2 later he popped back up in the States with a new wife he met abroad, and never mentioned his old family again. Apparently, when he met his new wife abroad, she knew he had a family back in the States and encouraged him to leave them, and that's why my mother never liked her. Must have been around 10 years old at the time. Went to McDonald's with my older brother and my mum. When we left and started walking home, We saw my dad in our car at the driveway for KFC, so we thought it'd be a good idea to walk up and ask him for a lift back home. When we were walking up, I saw somebody sat in the passenger seat but thought nothing of it. He works in the T and often gave people lifts, etc. Turns out that person was my 8-year-old half-brother. I already knew my dad had cheated before and that he married the other woman, but one day, many years after and about 3 ago, my mom was on the phone with the other woman about my dad and I heard a baby crying. I asked who that was and it turns out I had a 3-year-old brother. Then I found out I had a 15-year-old brother who was a year older than I was. I had fun harassing my dad for a while. Still, for life. All people here are telling half the story. We want to know what happened after they got caught. Don't leave us hanging. My father's girlfriend added a picture to her Facebook of my dad and my younger brother that she had taken off of my mother's Facebook with the comment, "Look at my handsome boys." This lady was a nut job. My mother, my brother or me had no idea who she was. After some serious Facebook stalking, I had to confront my entire family with my findings. The lies were so elaborate and it had been going on for so long my brothers didn't believe me until I actually showed them the physical evidence. We walked up to this woman's house and knocked on the door. She answered with the most dumbfounded look on her face. I asked her children, who were sitting in the living room, if they knew their stand-in father, my dad, was married. None of them knew. It was a nightmare. Not to mention this all happened days before Christmas. The mistress pretty much went off the deep end after my dad broke it off, harassing all of us at our workplaces, our homes and social media. In the end, after cutting it off and a few orders of protection later, my parents are still together and in couples counseling. But my mother plays a much more aggressive role in the family, manages all the funds, calls the shots, etc. Not your typical secret family gig, but others posted about unknown siblings, so here's my weird tale. Mom and dad have been divorced since I was a year old. I'm their only child together. First marriage for both. My dad and I were mostly pen pals as I was growing up and only saw each other every few years. He lived on the opposite coast. When I was about 20, my mom out of the blue tells me that my dad had a son before me. She said when he was serving in Vietnam, he married a Vietnamese woman and they had a son. When he was a toddler, he died in an accident. She was surprised he never told me. He has never mentioned it. Fast forward about 10 years. Mum passed away from cancer. I called dad to tell him. We have about a 5 or 10 minute conversation. He didn't know she was sick, so he was shocked. In that short conversation he says, "You know, your mom had another kid before you. When she was in high school she got pregnant and they sent her away to one of those homes until the baby was born. The baby was put up for adoption. So you've got a brother or sister out there somewhere. Pretty crazy, huh? I'm surprised she never told you. WTH. Both parents had kids before me and neither of them told me, but both told me about each other. Sigh." My dad was having an affair with a woman he worked with. She too married. She got pregnant and my dad came clean to his brother and mother after the baby was born. He stayed with my mom until the child was 2 and none of us knew until my uncle couldn't handle the guilt. My dad fessed to my mom and my brother overheard the argument they were having. He was 6. So that day is when my dad told my brother and I that we had a little brother. My dad didn't have a second family, so to speak, but I found out he had an affair that resulted in him having a daughter about a year before I was born. I found out when I was 12 and it was super weird. The way they told me was probably the weirdest part though. They were telling me to add her on MySpace even though I didn't know her, and I basically had to guess who she was and why they wanted me to add her. At first I had a lot of resentment, but after a few years I kinda just embraced it and figured out that sadly in society crap like that is incredibly common. She lives super far away and I have zero contact with her. Her family is batshit crazy and only talk to us when they need something. My mom's biological father got in contact with us later in his life and eventually sort of manipulated my mom into taking care of him. After he died, we found out he had started and walked out on 3 families aside from my grandmother and my mom. We basically just shared what we knew about him in recent years and offered our condolences. Happened to a kid I went to elementary school with. He and his mother found out that his dad was living this double life and had another family in some other state. kids, house, everything. If I recall correctly, the father ended up shooting himself in the head in the shed behind the family's house. Very sad. WTF. That ended abruptly, but TBH. I get why he saw that as his only way out. My father's father was secretly leading another life for almost my dad's entire life. He found out when he called him on my grandfather's birthday to see how he was doing. When my grandfather answered, there were kids yelling either background pop pop. Look, it just makes me sad to think I wasn't the only kid calling him pop pop. My dad married 8 times, once he had 3 wives at the same time with the children. Today I have 23 sisters and brothers. The only bad thing about this is that wives hate each other. My dad was a rich African Somalian man. It's culture for us to marry 4 wives if you can afford only. Today I have brothers and sisters that I don't associate with cause our moms hate each other. My dad is old now but happy. This isn't exactly the same kind of thing, but I figured my story was kind of similar, so I guess I'll share. Growing up, my parents fought a lot. My mom had my brother when she was 14-15. My brother's father abandoned them. She then married my dad and had me when she was 18-19. They stayed together a while longer into their early 20s and had my little sister. They divorced when I was 8, and growing up they had ongoing custody battles. My brother was my half brother, but since we lived together I never really thought about it. My sister has always been the one with the darkest skin tone and hair. Both my parents are pretty dark. My mom is half Persian Iranian and my dad is indigenous, Mexican, and white. Me and my brother grew up looking the whitest in our family. I never thought much of it. One day, my mom asked me if I wanted to go pick her friend up with her. This guy friend of hers. We drove to the casino where he was at and she introduced him to me. He looked at me really weird, so I assumed he was a perv. Flash forward, he starts living with us. Lots of men lived with us throughout the years, so this was a common thing growing up. I had just gotten back to the school after a softball game and my mom was there to pick me up. She asked me to sit at the picnic table outside and talk with them. She then tells me this guy could possibly be my father. My dad didn't care when my mom got pregnant and decided to be my father. He put his name on my birth certificate and raised me as his own. But boy, did me and this guy look similar. I remember we had similar looking feet. He even showed us pictures of his family members that I looked so much alike. I found out I could possibly have a half brother a few years younger than me. My dad knew that I knew and told me that if I wanted we could get a DNA test done. I refused for a long time because I didn't want to know. I believed the man who raised me was my father and that was that. My possibly bio dad was a drunk. One night he ended up punching my mom in the face and she kicked him out. I blocked him on social media and out of my life for a few years. I contacted him again about a year ago and found out he's doing much better. No longer a drunk. He's engaged and has his own garden now. Sent me pictures of his new truck and his garden. At that point I was ready for a DNA test and asked him if he would be up for it. He said we'd split the cost and to tell him when and where to meet up. We haven't done it yet, but soon I hope to talk to him again so we can. I found out at around 11 or 12 that my dad not only had one secret family, but in fact up to 5 or 6 secret families in multiple countries. My dad is currently sitting at a total of 24 children with 5 or 6 different women and counting. I have gotten the chance to meet some of my older half brothers and sisters and a couple of my younger half brothers and sisters, and almost all of them are wonderful people. Even though the ages range greatly, we are basically all in agreement that my dad isn't winning any Father of the Year awards. I found out that my dad had an entire family before my mom and my siblings. He had 2 kids and a wife. What I don't get is our dad is the most loving and respectable man I know, but he has never ever seen his other 2 kids since they were 12. I always wonder why he does not see them. Then I imagine how horrible they must hate him and think he is terrible, where our family thinks he is amazing. My biological mother had me out of wedlock, and I was adopted away before any of her family found out. I know about them, but as far as I know, she's never told them about me. Obligatory, not my parents, but a family member. My mom is very close to our uncle. When her father passed away, my uncle stepped up and told her that she is his daughter now, and I'm his granddaughter. He has treated us very well, and trusts my mother so much. My uncle has a daughter with another woman that no one knows about. There are 2 people aside from my uncle that know, myself and my mother. My mom slipped up one day when I said he has 4 kids, right? She corrected me and said no, 5, and that's how I found out about his 5th kid. My uncle is an older man, I think late 70s, early 80s. He's been married twice. His first wife, who he had his kids with, passed away young. He has been with his second wife for 25 plus years. All his children are adults well into their 40s and 50s. A few years back, my uncle confessed to my mother that he has a love child. He claims the woman came onto him, and the rest is history. He asked my mother to tell his wife and children about his other daughter when he passes away. I have no idea if my mom will go through with it. That's a pretty large burden to put on someone. Not myself, but my mother and grandmother had a bad situation with my biological grandfather. My grandmother was 17 or 18 at the time when she met my 30-year-old grandfather and had an ongoing relationship for years. Then my grandmother got pregnant with my mother and things became sour very quick. My grandfather had made it very clear to my grandmother that he had a previous marriage that didn't work out and had 2 children prior to their split, but in actuality he was still married. In a on again off again sort of relationship with his wife, but still very much in that relationship. When my grandmother found out, she ended their relationship but was now still both with an infant child on her own because her parents disowned her for having a child out of wedlock, and essentially at the mercy of God that she could afford it essentially on her own. A few years passed and my grandfather got back in touch with my grandmother and told her he wished to be a part of my mother's life. Something my grandmother didn't feel right about denying my mother regardless of their issues, and she honestly felt she needed some help. He financially helped support my mother, but my grandmother still felt something was off. He would visit on lunch breaks from work, or my mother would have to come down and wait for him at his workplace, and he never showed up on holidays or weekends. And he never ever would bring her to his home. This sort of odd relationship went on for 4 or 5 years, and my grandmother had grown very skeptical of his secretive ways, and my mother, growing into her teens, became perceptive of his lies and odd behavior. But he was still there enough and financially helped enough to not warrant questions, I guess. Then one day a mutual friend they had contacted to tell my grandmother that my grandfather had been shot and was in the hospital. My grandfather was a cop and had been shot on duty. My grandmother didn't like the man he was, but for my mother's sake took her to the hospital to visit him. When they got there, he was in his room with his wife and 2 children. Then he introduced his family to his friend and her daughter, and it left my grandmother and mother both speechless and furious. That was the last day my grandfather and mother spoke for over 20 years. My mother was done with being a secret and knew she would be better off without him. It wasn't until last year, after my grandmother had passed, that my mother was contacted by him. She doesn't speak to him anymore, but she does now have a relationship with his daughter, her sister, and they have become fast family and seem to benefit from each other in their lives. I'm not sure if my mother and grandmother were the secret family in this situation, but it takes a real evil mind to live this kind of double life. Felt like using a throwaway for this one. It happened pretty recently, so I have a bit of residual salt left over if you don't mind. This happened maybe 8 months ago. He and my mom got into arguments pretty frequently throughout my childhood, and I was used to him not being around for a while. It happened so often that I never really paid it much attention. However, at that particular point in time, it had been nearly a month since I'd seen him. My mom quietly called me down to the basement to tell me why it had been so long since the last time I'd seen him, as well as the reason why he stopped paying for me to attend college, and the reason we had to move back to our grandparents' house right midway through my first semester. She recently found out that I have a secret half-sister who's maybe 2 years younger than me. She also said that the minute she confronted him about it, he didn't so much as apologize. She was in tears when she begged me not to let my little brother know about it. Recently, he texted me asking if he could borrow $200, even though he knows good and well that I need that money to pay for class. He then says to forget about it, and I think that it's over, but he immediately calls me back saying that he really needs the money. I then told him that my mom wouldn't tolerate him borrowing money from me. He told me to make something up and then meet him somewhere, and I refused because I didn't want to lie to her. He then said that I was being flat out disrespectful considering all that he did for me in the past and that he wouldn't call me again. So then I think that's the end of it, and a really bittersweet one. But later that day he shows up at my job to ask for the money again. At that point I tell him that I still can't give him the money and that he really has to leave because dealing with that in front of my co-workers and not far from my boss looks really bad. So he leaves in a huff saying, "You know what? I'm done with you." I could tell that I did the right thing in not giving him the money because I felt terrible, but I didn't regret it. He still comes around every once in a while because not everyone in the house knows what happened except for me and my mom. What's really lame is that he basically hides from me. He can't even bring himself to apologize. He still hasn't apologized to my mom for everything he put her through since before I was born. The last time he was here, he left before I even made it down the stairs. I know I'm gonna have to be the bigger person and make the effort to reach out to him someday before I somehow lose the chance, but it's crazy how he was able to ruin the 20 years worth of respect I had for him over the course of a single day. Currently, he's barely even an adult in my eyes. Whoa, that feels like a load off my chest. Sorry I ended up writing out a whole darn anthology. Not about me, but my dad. Around 1994 my dad was sitting in the living room watching Oprah with his mom, my grandmother. Oprah had some special guest on her show who discovered she had a long lost sibling or something like that. As the story goes, my dad jokingly said to my grandma, "I don't have any secret siblings." Right to which my grandmother seriously replied, "Oh, just the one." Turns out his father, my grandfather, had been separated from my grandmother for a few years between 1977 to 1980. In that time he saw another woman and they had a daughter together. The funny thing is that it wasn't even supposed to be a secret, it was just that somehow no one had ever thought to tell my dad. Nothing really happened afterwards. My dad reached out to her. They've met up a few times over the past 20 plus years, probably not at all in the 10-15. My sister worked with a lady who had a long-term boyfriend, 14 years together. She was in her late 40s, early 50s, and as far as I know they didn't have kids. She would sometimes have to miss out on family events due to her work schedule, and this time it was an event for his family. They were all going out for dinner to celebrate something, and she wasn't able to go because of work. The night of the dinner something changed at work, so she ended up leaving early and decided she'd call them for dinner. This was before mobile phones were commonly owned, so she didn't call ahead. When she got to the restaurant, she discovered that her boyfriend had brought another woman. She quickly discovered that he had brought this woman to many family events, and that everyone in his family not only knew about this other woman, but they all decided to keep it from her. No one wanted to get involved in it, but they were okay with him bringing his mistress along and lying to his girlfriend. It had been going on for years. He was dumped very quickly. My father didn't raise me. I knew he had to have had kids, but I never knew there was such a gap. I was searching through the net, trying to search for my father that fell off the face of the earth. While on Facebook, I found out he had an entire family, about 6 children, all in their early to mid 40s. I'm 28. I guess I was the secret kid, haha. It's been 2 years since I found out my father was in his freaking late 80s. I'm now trying to form relationships with my half siblings and my father. It's pretty tough to W some of my half siblings because of age difference and the fact that I lost my brother a few years ago. Also because my father is basically on his last leg. My dad told me as he was dropping me off at school that day. Rough morning, didn't see him for a few months. I'm still adjusting, but things are rough. So I recently learned that I'm part of the second secret family. Apparently my great grandfather left Denmark and moved to a large city in the US where he got married and had 2 kids. The only problem was that he had a wife and kids back home in Denmark. I think maybe he had immigrated with the plan to make money and send for his family and then decided to just start over. I think they thought he was dead or something. Years later one of his Danish relatives was visiting this big US city and happened to walk by a photography studio where she saw a beautiful family portrait of my great grandfather and his new family. So yeah, they eventually found out. Don't know the details of the fallout beyond great grandfather eventually killing himself using battery acid. I know my mom said that once. Years later, she and her parents had arranged to visit the Danish family members, grandpa's half siblings, when she was a kid, and that when they got to the house they rang the doorbell and no one answered, even though someone was clearly home. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.